I have moved. I am no longer in your podatier.
My podatier. Thank you for
Yeah.
using the correct terminology. You're in
Well,
our
I was
conference
trying to
room.
help you avoid. I originally didn't want to because I wanted to help you evade the taxes you'd have to pay on it.
Yes. By the way, speaking of words, you got burned real hard for the last episode. You know right
Yeah.
away. You read the comments. You know what you said. You know what you
Well,
said.
I'm aware now of the Jackals experience. This is my first.
Right. I do not want this to turn into corrections, so I've
No,
made
I
a
know.
choice not to read every comment. But what did you
Yes.
you could not find the word inedible? Is that correct?
Edible. I said eatable.
I see. Okay.
I said eatable instead of edible, which, by the way, is entirely a word. And
Sure,
I've seen
sure.
some, as you would have called it in corrections, and we won't turn this into an episode of corrections, but as you would call it, jackal on jackal violence, where some have been responding and saying eatable is a word. And it means exactly what it sounds like. So, yes, obviously, I will cop to the fact that I was searching for the word edible and I didn't say it.
Right.
But what I did land on is still an entirely acceptable word.
Right. It's just the one that slightly dumber people use.
Yes, it's definitely what Trump would use
Yeah.
if he were talking about.
He would do that double clutch thing where he goes,
Yes.
eatable or edible.
Yes.
Right, double,
Yeah,
double.
the people
But
are
although
saying
it's
both.
not, that's not true, Trump, because
Yes.
but he's never one where both work.
Yes. He would say something like, it would be like edible parentheses able to eat question mark, like close in a tweet.
Right.
Like he always
Yes.
does that thing where he tries to define the word in a tweet or gives an alternative in the parentheses afterward.
Yeah.
So you'd be like, the blueberries are eatable, parentheses, can be swallowed, question mark. Yeah.
Hey, so this is our third episode of Closer Look, Out of Office, parentheses, Proof of Life.
Yes.
And we're trying to get on a schedule where we are recording this on Tuesday, August 25th.
That's right.
We want to lay the dates out because we were the last episode, episode 2. We recorded it before the Supreme Court basically said what we predicted they say, which is like, yeah, just do the ballroom.
Yeah, exactly. And they said they might get to a real ruling at a later date, but I kind of, that really feels to me like they're kind of just
they're
gonna let that one
definitely
roll.
giving him a window of time to finish building the ballroom.
Yes. They saw the gambit that we were talking about, which is that he's rushing to do it. And every other court in the country was like, that's not cool. You can't do that.
Stop.
Don't stop. Don't
Yeah.
rush to finish building this thing that is illegal. But
Because
then the
other
Supreme
courts
Court,
realize that the way to get people to not do illegal thing is you make them stop.
yes, that's right. It's
Whereas
called
the Supreme Court seems to be more like, well, who
Yeah.
knows? What's right? What is right and wrong?
it's not our place to intervene here.
Certainly not now.
Yeah, certainly not in this particular case. Now, if we wanted to disenfranchise a bunch of voters, then of course we would immediately intervene, as they did in the case immediately afterward with mail-in voting.
Yeah,
like
could
they intervened.
Immediately come up with we can set a hard boundaries on this one.
You're allowed to ask the Postal Service to make lists of citizens who are allowed to, like insane things that Trump is asking the Postal Service to do now to restrict mail-in voting. The Supreme Court immediately was like, we got to jump in on this one. But the ballroom, they're like, we got time. We got time.
Also, they brought a lot of pavement in, and steel bars are so hard to get to one place. You don't want to make them move back.
He's so good
hey,
at flagpoles. Yep.
I want to say I read an article in The Atlantic, which is one of the many publications that Donald Trump and Republicans would say is fake news. Mm-hmm. They said that the IndyCar race was a success.
Yeah.
And again, I'm obviously I want to come at this from a place I would not know what makes a successful IndyCar race or an unsuccessful one, but
Yes.
I do. I want to defer to the author of that piece and say, by all metrics, it seems like it was a success.
Yeah. Okay. I agree with you. I'll stipulate that I have no idea. I was barely aware of the IndyCar race happening until
Barely aware of it. However,
Yes.
I want to read you a quote from Sean Hannity, because I found this quote interesting. This was a Sean Hannity tweet. Yeah. And again, from the position of, it sounds, and I'm willing to agree it was a success. Sean Hannity. They said Washington could never host an actual race. 6 military branches, a green flag from the president himself, and Air Force One buzzing the finish line later. DC just proved them all wrong. So again, who the said you couldn't do it? Like, who? Why can't you just take the win? Like, it has to immediately be you finally do something that even I will concede. And obviously, if you're listening or watching, Sal is being very reluctant to concede it. I mean, we can tell that he's very mad even from this point of view that I have. With that said, just take the win. You're the most incompetent administration. Everything you do turns to
yes.
And you have one thing that goes off smoothly, and it's like, told ya.
Yeah.
Like, I eat crow. I didn't even know. I had to Google today, Tuesday, whether it had happened or not.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, that's how little I paid attention to this.
Who was saying?
Yeah.
Who was saying it couldn't happen? Who was making these predictions? Like, of all the things to predict, there's many things to be out there prognosticating about. Was there a Kalshi bet that was like the IndyCar race?
Was this? I mean, again, was this the last month of MS Now? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where
Did
they
I
just
miss a whole? Yeah.
They were ignoring Iran and the trade war with Canada and just talking about how tires were going to go flying into the reflecting pool. Like, what?
Bernie's been out on the stump.
Yeah.
Mamdani. The radical left, the radical left was out there every single day saying the IndyCar race could never happen in Washington, D.C.
And are the Democratic Socialists going to admit that you can have races? All right. Anyway, I'm so mad.
We have to admit to being wrong about something that we didn't even know was happening.
Yeah. The next time Bernie's on Meet the Press, it could be like, I want to start, Kristen, by saying I owe the Trump administration an apology. I didn't think they would be able to do races. I thought after the race, the tires will go everywhere on the tires. But just sucks.
It just sucks. But it actually, to your point, it shows you how desperate they are for a win, what they would consider a win. And not only that, but to have something to shove in the face of the opposition. Because like you said, everything they are currently doing is turning to like the U.S. lost jobs last month. Like, wages are falling behind inflation. Bond yields are at like decade-long highs. The Iran war is a complete chaos, and there's no end in sight. And so one thing they have to be like is like, see, they act as if it was like a promise they made on the campaign trail. Like, remember when Kamala said, there's no way you can do an IndyCar race?
Yeah.
Like, Kamala was out there every day. Tim Walz was out there every day on the campaign trail, and they were saying, I will guarantee you one thing right now. There is one thing that can't be done. We could win a war with Iran easily. Right. We could bring gas below $2 a gallon, but one thing we can't do is stage an IndyCar race on the streets of Washington, D.C.
No races.
No races.
That was the thing. They said no races, and we got the race. We got the race we wanted.
Yeah.
Where do we start? What else is going on this week? Sal.
I have a bit of housekeeping I wanted to bring up with you, actually.
Okay, great.
So we've been talking about, we're doing this podcast because it's very therapeutic for us until we have our show back. And, a lot of people very kindly tell us all the time that, our show is therapeutic and cathartic for them.
And the breaks are a drag.
Yeah, and so we feel the exact same way. This is also very therapeutic and cathartic for us. We originally called it Out of Office because that it seemed we got our really awesome digital team sent us a list of options, and that seemed like the most accurate description of what this was, which is to imply we'll be back in the office at some point, but for now we're out of the office. Yeah. However, people seem to overwhelmingly prefer the title Proof of Life.
Right.
I haven't seen many comments of people saying, I really am glad you chose Out of Office over Proof of Life. And so I have a bit of housekeeping that I wanted to I think we should hash this out right now. Should we just change the title of this to Proof of Life 3 episodes in?
I mean, once you let everybody know whose idea Proof of Life was.
It was yours. I said.
Yes.
I
Did you? I don't know
if
if you made that clear enough.
No, I did. The first
Okay, gotcha.
episode, I said you had an
first
idea
episode.
that I really liked, and the only reason we
just thought it
didn't.
seemed, yeah.
Yes, we were afraid that it would imply, much like Mitch McConnell, that we were near death,
Yeah.
and that the only reason that we were doing this, but ultimately,
Yeah.
But ultimately,
it
it's-
did remind me to.
oh, okay, great, alive.
There we go.
Yeah,
Proved it.
great. You've convinced me. You've convinced me.
Can we also address it again? I don't want to make this correction. Is that Shoemaker's note on the last one is that when my glasses are off, my baby blues really pop, but when I put them on, I look like Marcy from Peanuts. And he sent a picture. So now I'm trying to do this. So so now I have a splitting headache because I can't see anything. But I don't want to get
Shoemaker,
Marcy.
Nasty guy. The only
Bad guy.
bad guy, nasty guy, almost as nasty as Canada, which we'll get to.
Oh my
Almost
God, we
as
have so
nasty.
much. There's so much.
We have so
By
much
the
to
way,
get to. Yeah.
with the fact that, again, Iran, in case you're wondering, not going any better since the last time we were here, just to fold in a trade war with Canada,
Yeah.
who also provides us with energy.
Yes. Yeah. Well, there's one thing I wanted to talk about before we get into Canada,
Yeah.
because we're talking about the concept of proof of life.
Yes.
And it seems like a lot of people in the Republican Party these days feel the need to prove that they still exist.
Yeah.
And one of
That
those
they're
people,
alive.
yes, that they are alive. And in fact, in some cases, are coming out in public to make that announcement. And so this is really cool, actually. The First Lady held a press conference to make a big announcement about her agenda. And it's really exciting and it's game changing. And so we want to show that to you right now. This is an announcement about what the First Lady is up to.
Good afternoon. I heard you missed me. Here I am.
That's it.
Here I am.
Here I am. This is, yeah.
Why are there so many people in the Republican Party right now who feel what is going on? Where there's this, I mean, I know what's going on, which is everything's going really badly, so everybody's disappearing.
So she's like, I'm gonna lay low, but then
Yeah.
this whole Natalie situation happened.
Yes. Yeah.
I would say right now, if there was a subheading for the last week at the White House, it's we need to talk about Natalie.
Yes.
We've heard
Yeah.
more stuff about Natalie.
Yes, we've gotten a lot more details, strange details that are apparently strange to people working inside the White House. It's not
Yes, this
like
is not
it's
just-
not us making these observations.
Right.
These are coming from reporting, and in particular, a book by two New York Times reporters, Jonathan Swan.
Jonathan Swan. Yep.
Yes, and there's a lot of details coming out now because of these three words uttered by Georgia Senator Jon Ossoff, which,
Right.
speaking of triggered, the amount that they love to use the word the amount that they love to claim they triggered the left, the amount that these three words, travel with Natalie, Trump
Yep.
wants to travel with Natalie. That's what Jon Ossoff said in the context of a broader conversation about Trump's self-enrichment and stock trading and playing golf. He said Trump wants to travel with Natalie. It's unearthed all of this like freak out and meltdown that
And
the
then
White House
opened
has
the
itself
door
had.
for everybody to write about it.
Yes.
Again, 3 words from Jon Ossoff, a billion words from the White House and its supporters, and so now we're finding out about Natalie Harp, who
That's right.
carries a little printer around with her. Which, by the
Yes.
way,
So
I've
yeah.
had my show for a while. Why is there not somebody in my office with a little printer that I just get to like print up nice things about me?
Well, I was going to say, so, people have also very nicely in the comments said, one thing I really enjoyed is people are saying, oh, it's really nice to get to see like the sort of behind the scenes relationship that goes into a closer look, which is which is really nice. And I wanted to share more about that and pick a bone with you because we were texting about getting ready for this episode, and you texted me. You said ready for the podcast tomorrow, and I texted you back. Seth, I want things to always be right between us. I never want to bring you anything but joy. You are all that matters to me. I don't want to ever let you down. I remember our long phone calls when we would talk about everything and nothing. I want to get back to that synergy. We shouldn't have to talk about work all the time. It is I who is unworthy. Thank you for being my guardian and protector. And you just responded with a thumbs up.
Yeah. And I know that now that those are public, your text to me, people think it's weird. I don't know why. And like, yes, did you ride in my trunk one time because we did not have room for you in the car? Yes. Have you run alongside my golf cart? Yes, you have.
So let's play the clips just describing, because this is reporting. This is just like, again, this has been unearthed because this is stuff that people in the White House were concerned about. It's not people outside who are obsessing over it. It's people inside the White House.
Yeah. And, one of the things, again, I've heard Maggie Haberman, who is now doing a fair amount of press about this because their book did, unearth maybe the strangeness of this relationship. One thing she really keeps hammering is that this is a lot different than first administration Trump. There was no sort of equivalent to Natalie Harp in Trump 1.
Yes. There's an important reason she points out, which, by the way, relates to what we're going to get to next. We're going to talk about the trade war with Canada. This is actually very much related to that. So, because it's about who controls the information that gets to the president of the United States.
Her name is Natalie Harp. She's a former host for the far-right network One America News. And today, at just 34 years old, is considered one of President Donald Trump's closest personal assistants. Harp is known for toting around a portable printer and printing stacks of papers and positive press for President Trump on the spot. She's become known as the human printer.
Trump basically just says, Natalie, get me this, or Google this.
In their new book, Regime Change, New York Times reporters Jonathan Swan and Maggie Haberman also report on letters that Harp has left for Trump. Swan described them as odd, adoring, and intimate.
Letters published in full for the first time by the Daily Beast show staffer Natalie Harp writing to the president in 2023, and I'm quoting now, "You are all that matters to me," end quote. And also this, "I don't want to ever let you down," end quote.
It goes on to say, "I could not have parted with you to anyone less worthy. And I will add, it is I who is unworthy.
Thank you for being my guardian and protector in this life."
Natalie Harp is one of the people who took over posting duties to the president's Truth Social post in this term.
Harp once jumped into the trunk of a vehicle in Trump's motorcade when she was told there was not room for her to travel with him to a hearing in a New York City courthouse in 2023.
Nothing is less sexy than hearing Wolf Blitzer read your loving and adoring letters to someone.
You never want, of all the people to read your letters out loud.
Yeah.
You never want.
You
to
mean
be Wolf
everything
Blitzer.
to me, and I will never let you down. It's not very good. I don't know why I'm doing.
That's the first. I think that might be the first time you've ever. Yeah, it's a little more Brokaw than
Natalie Harp. Natalie Harp claiming that she will never let the president down.
Yeah, definitely. It should be Brokaw. But the other thing I was going to say about that is, of all the places that you'd want to jump in the trunk of an SUV to go, a Manhattan courthouse is the least.
Yeah,
is the
she
least
went to.
cool.
Well, she was there every day for his trial.
Like maybe if you were like a teenager, you'd jump in the back of the trunk of someone's car to go to like a cool house party. Mm-hmm. But you wouldn't want to do it to go to the Manhattan criminal courthouse.
Yeah. But yeah, I feel like we have a very divergent ideas on what's a good way to enjoy an afternoon.
So you would.
So Natalie Harp, we're talking about controlling the information, and that's really a big piece of this, right?
That's the biggest thing. So let's just play the next clip because that explains, and then that will help get us to this insane trade war with Canada. Because, what happened in the first term basically was because Trump was obviously wildly unprepared to be president of the United States. Obviously still is wildly unprepared,
right.
But at the time, he relied on the existing Republican infrastructure to fill his administration. So there were a lot of people around him who were like, quote unquote traditional Republicans or whatever, who would give him like semi-normal information or advice. And now he's in a position where he relies on people specifically like Natalie Harp who funnel insane information to him.
Right.
And then he makes decisions based on that insane information. And so this again is Maggie Haberman explaining like why this has particularly come under so much scrutiny and why this worries people inside the White House. Again, like people in the administration are worried because she controls the flow of information. And in fact, she contradicts some of Trump's most senior advisors or people who are tasked with briefing him and giving him information.
One of the scenes that we have in the book is him demanding the quote unquote real numbers during a tariff discussion when he is being told by his own staff what the actual numbers are, and he wants Natalie to go get him some different set of numbers that just didn't comport with reality.
It is that interesting thing of you have Natalie Harp and you believe that she is your pipeline to real information. And yet you were also okay with her riding in the trunk of your car. Yeah. Like those, that's like you just can't square that circle. When they're like, wait,
yeah, if you,
well, he's like, I got the real numbers. They're like, from who? From Natalie. They're like, which one's Natalie? They're like, remember the one jumped in the trunk? The one we went to the courthouse in the trunk? The one, remember we were at the golf course, she was running to keep up with the golf cart? Yeah, she's got the real numbers. It's just...
Yeah, once, that's the thing, you lose all your credibility once you jumped in the trunk. Once you jumped in the trunk.
Again, that's the thing.
Not with an insane person, though. Not with an insane person.
Right.
Yeah, an insane person thinks that's cool. Thinks that's proof of your reliability and your loyalty.
Well, it's right. It's not. It's proof of loyalty, and loyalty is more important than reliability to Trump.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. But so also, you never want to be in a position with really anybody, but in particular the president of the United States, asking for quote the real numbers.
Yeah.
Like that sounds like a degenerate gambler who refuses to accept that they lost.
Because again, is a deeply unwell person. But his inability to accept that he has the most powerful job in the world with the best access to the truth any single one of us could possibly have, right?
Yes.
Should he choose to pull the correct levers, he would have more information about anything that you and I could ever get our hands on.
Yeah.
And instead he's asking, this person with a chair against the wall to print it out on her little handheld.
He's in a meeting in the Oval Office with theoretically could be, presumably, some of the most knowledgeable people on earth. He could theoretically be doing that. He could be in the meeting in the most powerful room with the most powerful people. And he's saying, somebody go run to the trunk. Knock on the trunk.
Knock on the trunk.
Knock on the trunk. And there's get the lady with the little printer attached.
Right.
She should be the
only one in there.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's probably her. Yeah, I think there's just the one in there. So just her. That's Natalie. I did ride in a trunk once, Sal. I was at the Kentucky Derby, and we were leaving, and I was inebriated, and there was not room for me. We had brought 2 cars to the race, and I rode in a trunk on the way back to our motel, and fell asleep in the trunk, and my friends forgot I was there, and so I'm just saying, no judgment. and while I was there, and once I woke up, I didn't just bang on the trunk right away hoping to get their attention. I started running international trade numbers, and it's ultimately it's a pretty good place to get some thinking done.
You were curious. You're curious whether we were in a trade surplus or deficit.
When they eventually when they finally
Yeah.
remembered and got me, I was like, they opened the trunk, and the first words out of my mouth was, "Canada's been ripping us off for years."
And they were responding to you like, well, okay, but if you take out energy imports, and then you were like, no. I've been in the trunk doing the math, and I have the real numbers.
And this is, by the way, this is the mid-'90s, so the printers were loud. And I'm like, stand by.
The AOL sound. The AOL.
Yeah. It took forever. It was like a bubble jet printer, so it was like, in 45 minutes, you're going to be eating your words.
But so that gets us now to the huge story this week, the biggest thing, which is that Trump has plunged us into a completely unnecessary and pointless and disastrous and chaotic trade war with one of our closest trading partners and closest allies, period, Canada.
And by the way, this is if everything was going great, with everything else, this would still be a bad idea.
And also, it's like no one ever talked about this during the campaign. Like, during the campaign, it was all, no, I'm the only person who can take on Russia and China. And then the second he actually has any power whatsoever and gets into office, he's picking fights with Denmark over Greenland and Canada because he knows in reality he can't confront people who will confront him back, like China and Russia. So he can pick fights with like the European Union and Canada.
Also because, generations of American leadership before him has made promises, has built relationships, has intertwined our economies with their economies, right?
Right.
Whereas Canada, a month ago, Canada is trying to open this Gordie Howe Bridge. And, and then Trump basically is renegotiating the terms, and ultimately they're reasonable people who've built a bridge.
Yes.
I mean, it is an actual physical bridge, but it's also like a metaphor for what these countries have done with America, right? They built a bridge.
Yeah.
They wanted to tie their commerce to our commerce. It was supposed to be mutually beneficial. And so when Trump treats them all of a sudden like an adversary, they're in this tough position where they can't just say, okay, we won't, no bridge.
Yes. Yeah. He's breaking the central foundational thing that is supposed to make our democratic institutions function, which is that your word has to be good, because ultimately it's like we codify lots of stuff, but ultimately it's all about, like, can you trust us or not? And like, it's easy to be the guy who comes in and makes threats when everyone else spent like decades before building something. The same thing happened with Iran. Like, there was an intricate, elaborate diplomatic process that took place for a long time with hard work trying to figure out the best way to solve this problem. And then it's easy to be the guy who just like comes in and threatens to knock everything over unless you make me happy. Like, after everybody else has already done all of that work. And the same thing, like you said, with Canada, like, we've already done this work to integrate our economy. So now it's easy to just like come in and be the tough guy and be like, oh, I'll light everything on fire. Also, when you're just making money hand over fist, like, this doesn't matter to him. Like, he made $2 billion last year. Personally, like, he doesn't care.
But the interesting thing is, doesn't it feel like this week there's a real sense that everyone is just like, we don't care what you say anymore.
Yes, I do think there's a turning point, and in particular because when you see Canada, of all places, the most non-confrontational country, like, of all places, having to make threats in response to what Trump is saying. They're having to make real threats to him and finally stand up to him. They're like, when people see that, plus the fact that his approval numbers are so horrific, like, there's no pretending that there's a constituency to please. Like, that there's anyone really behind him with this. Like, everybody has seen that this is all bull and that everything's fallen apart and everything he's touched has turned to. And so no one has any reason to believe that there's anything behind anything he says because nobody wants this. The craziest thing to me is we do this all the time in a Closer Look where we reestablish what the terms of the campaign were and like play a montage of what everyone was talking about, because it seems like a million years ago, but it's just insane to me. Nothing that is happening right now was discussed at any point during the campaign. Like, it's like no one at any point said, and, we're in a 47-year-long war with Iran, so we're going to have to deal with that. And also Canada's very nasty, and we're going to have to start a trade war with them. Everything was just like, gas is going to be cheap, and your groceries are going to be affordable.
And we're going to call them groceries because they weren't, remember, he was the one who decided to call them groceries.
That's right. We finally came up with a term. Like,
that was great. That was the one thing that even at the time, you remember me saying, I'm like, I will say, do I care for his policies? No. know, but the fact that he
Yes.
came up with a word that we can finally use for
Yes.
all
You were
the
like,
food.
when I have all the loose items of food that I take from the food
Yeah.
store and I
Yeah.
throw them in the trunk and then I jump in the
and
trunk
I'd like
with the
say to
food.
my wife, I'm going to go for a loose food run. And then we had groceries, and that was one thing that he made better. He also, I want
Yeah.
to say something he posted, which is, again, just speaks to how nothing has been thought even half a step ahead.
Yes.
Someone should get these clowns to, quote, fall in line, or the consequences for Canada will be far, all caps, worse. Who is this someone you're waiting to save the day? Like, you're the president. Who do you, like, which ally is, like, what ally do you have that's going to want to waste their time to play, like, moderate between you and Canada in this, one-sided lunacy that you've decided to bear down on us?
Yeah. He is the guy who walks out of the bathroom at a party and is just like, somebody should go in there and fix that. Somebody...
It was the guy before me. I will say I like that there's a real nice 1-2 happening in Canada right now where you have Mark Carney, who seems like a real reasonable fellow, right?
Yes.
Like never gets his dander up. And then
you really have a good cop, bad cop situation
with
going
Doug
on.
Ford. With Doug Ford. Ontario Premier Doug Ford, who looks like you basically told Claude make a Canadian Donald Trump.
It's like he looks like dollar store Donald Trump.
Yeah, because again, I think he is like, cut from the same kind of cloth as Donald Trump.
Yeah. Yes.
And,
for sure. Yeah. So we should play. I love these two clips in juxtaposition. So first, there's the United States Trade Representative, and I love when a new guy gets introduced. We get a new guy now. There's a new character involved, and his name is like Jameson Greer, and he went on TV in the middle of this disastrous and self-destructive trade war with Canada, and he was like, and his main thing was like, guys, just be chill. Everything's so chill. There's no possible way that this could.
Don't worry. Yeah, it's good.
Don't worry about it. All right. So this is the United States Trade Representative, Jameson Greer, going on TV and addressing the fact that we are now in a disastrous trade war with our closest neighbor and ally.
There's no possible way it can really affect U.S. well-being.
Okay. No possible way.
No possible way.
Which is at that point you want to say, then we should just always do it. Like,
why weren't? If any, wait. So why weren't we?
There's no downside to a trade war. Well, let's go nuts.
Yeah. Yeah. But so that's so funny. Like these guys, they all think that they have the same like invincibility that Donald Trump does, or that it applies to everything. Because Trump is Magoo, and every time he steps off an awning, he falls into a truck full of potatoes, and so he's the luckiest man. It's a truck full of money.
He falls into a truck full of money. Yeah.
So that guy is on TV right now saying there's no way it could possibly go wrong for us. On the website of the Office of the United States Trade Representative, it says Canada has consistently been one of the top 2 trading partners for the United States. The two countries share a long history of supply chain integration, including especially in the automotive and textile industries and the energy sector. Most recently, in 2024, Canada was the top destination for U.S. exports and the 3rd largest source of U.S. imports. That's on that guy's website, and he's on TV going, this is going to be fine. Yeah. No big deal. But then, to your point, we have Mark Carney out there basically being like, hey, we have to be reasonable. And we have to have an agreement that works for everybody. And then we got bad cop Doug Ford, big bad guy, big bad nasty guy.
He walks into the interrogation room, definitely carrying a big old phone book.
But it's
phone
all
book
Canadian
and a bag of
numbers,
oranges. Like he just comes in and it's just Just
So he's
begging
got-
for Mark Carney to come back.
so here he comes with the phone book. So this is Doug Ford, in contrast to the United States Trade Representative saying nothing bad can happen; it can only good happen.
Yeah.
Here is Doug Ford making various threats to the United States.
He says he wants to attack the auto part manufacturers. Like, maybe he just doesn't understand how parts go back and forth 8 times. It would actually shut down your auto plants in the U.S. We need everyone to be on Team Canada and throw everything in the kitchen sink at them, no matter if it's electricity, if it's fuel. We could put massive, massive pain on the U.S.
So the United States Trade Representative is on TV saying nothing bad is going to happen. And the Ontario Premier is on TV saying, we're going to cut off electricity to the United States.
Yeah, just a guy who looks like he's going to follow through. I don't know if he will, but he looks like it.
Yeah.
There's
Definitely looks
another
like a cop from The Shield. He looks like a guy from The Shield.
Yeah. There is
Michael Chiklis.
Yeah. So this is from the same article where Trump asked for somebody else to tell the clowns to fall in line. A short time later, Ford was asked about his comments on the radio and whether he had been asked to tone it down. He said,
I have a lot of real estate on my ass, so he has a lot of room to kiss my ass.
By the way, I like that. I've never thought that one of the fears when you tell someone to kiss their ass is there's not enough room to do it. I just like, again, this is like, I like this thing that like Doug Ford's like, part of the fun of this is telling everybody I got a big ol' ass. The other thing is, he was calling him a bully.
I don't respond to a dictator like President Trump, a bully like President Trump. As I said before, he's the type of guy in school that would take your lunch money one day, take your toque off your head the next day, and then steal your running shoes.
Like, I'm like, I know a toque is like the most Canadian thing in the world, but like then running shoes, like lunch money toque running shoes. If you said here 3 days, there's a bully. You're going to run in the same bully 3 days in a row. First day lunch money, second day toque, whatever. Like third day, I'd be like, a hockey stick, back bacon, Molson. The fact that it's running shoes is I think that we might be in a real, again, if he becomes a major player in the news when we get back, I do think Doug Ford is going to bear a lot of fruit.
Yes. I do think he's going to make. I do think he'll make a lot of appearances in A Closer Look. Yes.
But like at the same time, we have this going on, and Jameson Greer being like, "This is a problem." We had Scott Bessent come out, and he announced Operation Economic Outcast, which is again just a terrible name.
Yeah.
And it feels like the emptiest of threats.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
To say you will be an outcast. But it's
like something that could in some contexts be cool.
Right.
So at the same time that we're in this disastrous trade war with Canada, this self-destructive trade war with Canada that's going to increase prices on everyday items for American consumers, at the same time, the Treasury Secretary is threatening secondary sanctions, as he calls them, against any country in the world, but particularly, for example, China and Russia, that still do business or trade with Iran.
Yes.
And he's threatening them, but he's not doing them yet. And reporters are like, well, if you're making the threat, if the whole point is to cut off Iran, why aren't you doing that now? And this was his response.
You described this as an economic D-Day, but D-Day wasn't a threat of an invasion, and the U.S. didn't give a timeline to Germany. So why not impose the sanctions today?
Well, we are giving everyone the opportunity to remedy bad behavior. Why would I want to blow up the global financial system?
So just admitting that were they to go through with these threatened sanctions, it would blow up the global financial system, which, again, I'm not an econ head.
Yeah.
Sounds bad. And again, you immediately get the sense, based on the reaction to this, that China doesn't give a
Yes. Also, it's an implicit confession that you can't do it.
Yeah.
Because you're admitting that you would be hurting yourself.
I want to play, if we can, just the way Bessent comes out. He seems a little flustered and he's kind of at his breaking point.
Good afternoon. Today, at President Trump's direction, the United States Treasury has begun Operation Economic Outcast, an unprecedented campaign against the Islamic Republic of Iran and its enablers.
I do think, right, we're seeing everybody who is, they've made this, obviously, Faustian bargain to be part of the Trump administration. He constantly makes everyone's job harder, right? I have no sympathy for how much harder their jobs are. They should have known. But basically, what everyone is doing is like, can everybody just stop? just do what we want you to do. Like, because again, like that's what like Trump is saying to them, like, just go fix it.
Yeah. There's a technical term that I've been seeing a lot of economists throw around because they're talking about this in relation to the trade war as well. We're talking about Trump's understanding of trade deficit and surplus. There's a technical term, and it's that he's a big old idiot because he, like in Canada, for example, he cannot process that a trade deficit is not losing money. We're not getting, quote, ripped off by a country that we have a trade deficit with. It just means that we're buying more things from them than they are from us. But also, the only reason that we have a trade deficit with Canada is because we need one huge thing from them that we get, which is oil and energy. Like, that's the big, if you take that out, we have a trade surplus with Canada.
And it's a very strange time based on everything that's happening worldwide to around with another place you get oil. Yeah.
Well, it's worth noting that he put the 50% tariffs immediately on things like hockey sticks and Canadian flags. Like, you have to pay a 50% tariff if you want a
loons. I think if you want to buy a loon, it's like through the roof.
Molson, if you want some Molson. Yeah. But he is waiting until January 1st for auto tariffs.
Right.
Because he knows he knows, and his people know that is insane, that would immediately raise prices on things.
It'd be very funny if he's like, what day is the midterm? The day after the midterms. Because like, but what, again, like you also, Michigan, Ohio.
Yes.
These are places that are going to feel this the most.
Yes, Michigan, Ohio, Maine. We already have the senator from Maine, Susan Collins, saying she's against this.
Yep.
Let's just play the clip really quick of her listing all the things that would be more expensive in Maine if these tariffs are implemented.
We produce a lot in Maine. Our blueberries, our potatoes, our lobster, our lumber that is processed across the border. If it comes back with a huge tariff on it, perhaps as much as 50%, that increases the cost of eating, building homes, and purchasing our best-known products.
First of all, the only thing that's safe to eat on that list right now is lumber.
That's right.
Yeah.
We switched the kids over to lumber 2 days ago. And it's mostly with ketchup. They're not complaining. If you give them enough ketchup. Yeah.
They're eating the wood. Trump gets confused and thinks that there's a community of beavers. He finds out about beavers and he's like, they're eating the wood.
They're eating the wood.
That's the other thing he still won't admit and genuinely doesn't seem to understand, which is that tariffs are paid by consumers people who are forced to confront political reality, like senators who are up for re-election in competitive states, have to admit that tariffs are taxes on consumers. And by the way, when they get refunded, as already happened once when the Supreme Court ruled that Trump illegally used emergency powers to levy all these tariffs on various products against countries all across the world, you know who they get refunded to? The corporations. People don't get their money back.
Nobody.
You and I don't get our money back.
Yeah.
Real quick, because we're talking about Senate races that are going to be affected by this, and one of them is Michigan, of course.
Yeah.
Probably one of the most, because the other thing we were talking about that Trump doesn't seem to understand is stuff goes back and forth across the border. And it's going to be, and that's particularly the case in Michigan. So people will be affected. The competitive race there is between Abdul El-Sayed and Mike Rogers. And Abdul El-Sayed was on Fox News, and he did an interview with Jesse Waters. And I think it's fair to say he pretty well manhandled Jesse Waters. Jesse Waters was not prepared for Abdul El-Sayed. And the only reason I want to play this clip is because this is an example of something I would write into A Closer Look. And I want to see if you would have kept it. Okay. So
gotcha.
let's play. So let's first play the first clip of Abdul El-Sayed. So he's making a very legitimate point that he wants to talk about affordability and real things that matter to real people every day. And Jesse Waters wants to talk about right-wing hysterical culture war bullshit. And so this is a clip about that.
I just think the government shouldn't tell you what kind of health care you should have. And if you're a minor, it's between
You want to
your
try
doctor
on
and your
kids?
parent. Now, if you disagree with that, if you disagree that health care decisions need to be made by a doctor and their parents and a patient, then we think we agree to disagree. But you want to put government inside.
So Abdul,
clinic
you're
or
a doctor,
hospital
right?
Selectively. I am.
So you think it's okay
go
for
ask-
a parent to
you don't believe
slash
me,
his
so just go
kid's
ask Columbia
thing-a-ling off?
University.
You think that's okay?
I mean, do you really want to have this conversation? Are you circumcised?
Yeah, but I mean, that's a
Jesse, are you?
personal question.
Okay,
doctor.
So you probably should want to move on.
Okay. So the thing I wanted to just point out about this is two. First of all, he pretty well handled the question, which is I want to talk about normal stuff and you want to talk about insane bullshit that nobody cares about and is false also. But second of all, now I know why Jesse Waters supports Donald Trump. He didn't have to pay for his circumcision.
He got it for free.
You know why? Tony?
No tax on tips.
I mean, fantastic. Just fantastic.
So now would that have stayed in A Closer Look if I had written that in?
Yeah.
Would you have left that in? I think
so.
it would. I think it would have played well.
It's like that question to Scott Bessent that I think flustered him was, the thing about D-Day, you're calling this an economic D-Day. The thing about D-Day was you didn't announce it in advance.
Yes.
You just did it.
Yeah.
So instead you're saying we're going to do a D-Day.
Yeah.
But, to what end would you announce it, And
yes. Also, we're going to do a D-Day to ourselves.
Right.
You better
also,
watch
it's
out.
real. I know I'm using this wrong. It's real stolen valor for these guys at podiums to be like, we're going to do a D-Day. But
Yeah.
it's not. We're not actually going to,
Yeah, we're going to do a D-Day,
D-Day,
but it's bank stuff.
It's bank stuff.
Imagine how much worse the opening to Saving Private Ryan would have been if instead of it was storming the beaches of Normandy, the actual D-Day, it was just guys in suits doing this.
Then one just
Okay.
move the decimal point here. 44% there. All right, buddy. Well,
we've once again proven we are alive.
We are alive.
Yes.
Thanks,
Much
everybody.
like
Thanks
Melania.
for watching. Thanks for
Yeah.
watching. Oh yeah, much like Melania.
Yes, and Mitch McConnell, and Melania are both alive.
And you know what she
exist.
says every time she leaves? She goes, "I'll be best."
Okay, great. That's where we're gonna end.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.